Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about horrific fantasy picks. The fusion of fantasy and horror really and truly is nothing new. The minute you start talking about this topic, it's inevitable names like Lovecraft will come up. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith. Just to give you an idea of how far back we're talking, that this kind of fusion goes on and on. But usually I find in the more recent context, whenever people talk about this, they're more talking about something like Game of Thrones, which is very much fantasy with an element of horror to it. And obviously more recent cases like J. Christoph's Empire of the Vampire stuff, and Richard Swan, and just to name a few examples. So like given the recent videos I've seen made about this particular combination, I thought it would be fun to just take some time and recommend a few of my favorite books that have some fun with those two genres and the way that they blend them. And I'm gonna leave off China Mayville, otherwise this entire list would just be China Mayville. But yeah, at number, and this is like no particular ranking or anything, it's just 5 random books I thought of. At number 1 I have Dale Bailey in the Nightwood. This is a World Fantasy Award, I think nominee or winner, one of the two. It was on the World Fantasy Award ballot anyway. And this is a gothic fantasy horror novel of about an American author who moves to England after the death of his child in order to finish the biography of an obscure British writer that he was putting together. And so he moves into the writer's house, which abuts this strange forest. So you already know which direction things are headed in. And as he delves more and more into the mystery of this writer and the way that the trajectory that his life took, he begins to understand more of the very rural setting that he's in and the woods that about the house. And so you can already kind of get the gist of what goes on in the story, but it's a standalone, and Dale Bailey has a lot of fun with he puts together a really good story here that is just a wonderful blend of the two. So highly worth checking out. Number 2 on the list that I thought would be fun to mention is another novel. Like, I think, actually, come to think of it, there's at least 3 novels on this list that are World Fantasy Award at nominees at minimum. Anyway, so number 2, the second one I wanted to talk about was C.s.e. Cooney's Saint Death's Duology. And this is, if you're a fan of Tamsin Muir's Gideon Locktomb's novels, this will be a series that's right up your alley. It's a duology that follows the coming of age of Miss Eleni Stones, who is the most powerful necromancer of her age, and the conflict that she becomes embroiled in with her mentor, who happens to be her grandfather, the ghost Irradiant Stones. And the first novel is all about, like, almost... To even talk about what the first novel is about, I kind of have to talk about how these books kind of blend genres. And this is these are very much fantasy novels, but they blend a cozy vibe and cozy concepts with things like found family and finding a place you belong, and these kinds of ideas with absolutely bloody, gory horror. And that's kind of what the first book is about. The first book is very much about Miss Eleni, her coming of age, where she goes through this entire conflict where I won't get into the details, but she basically she basically discovers a family of her own, and we go on that whole journey with her. And then the second book is about is the finale of the conflict with her and her grandfather. So like I said, if you're a fan of Tamsin Muir's Locktomb novels, these will work for you because they're action-packed. They have quite a few different bizarre themes and concepts and ideas that play in here. Like the style of horror in these books range everywhere from the grotesque to body horror to the more mundane. Like it's just all over the place. And then there's just the weird fusion Like, these books are weird in the best ways, weird in the most fun ways you can think of. Highly worth checking out. And like I said, the first one was a World Fantasy Award nominee, just to give you an idea of what caliber of book we're talking about. But yeah, moving on at number 3, the third book I wanted to talk about is a gothic horror novel that blends, well, not gothic horror. I shouldn't say it's a gothic horror novel. I should say it's an epic fantasy novel that was written like a gothic horror novel. And that's Lynn Fleming's The Bone Dolls Twin. This is like an older book. I think it was written in the early 2000s. Jesus, 25 years ago at this point. Anyway, yeah, it was written early 2000s, and right off the bat, we have what seems like a very standard epic fantasy kind of situation with an evil king who's killing off contestants to the throne, shall we say. And when one particular one is born, in an effort to save him, there's a very dark bit of magic that's performed. And as a result of that, the child, who will eventually go on to challenge this king, you would assume, they become haunted by a revenant. And the entire first novel is just this kind of uneasy story where the castle that the child resides in, it slowly falls, it slowly finds itself subject to the sway of this revenant. Like, it begins to fall into like decrepitude. The atmosphere, everything, like there's no. It's like the joy and the happiness is kind of sucked out of it. Like the horror of the events kind of suck that life out of the setting, and the child grows up very traumatized in this setting as a result. So, like I said, it's very much a gothic horror story, in a very written within an epic fantasy setting. And even aside from that, Lynn Fleming does quite a few other fascinating things in this story. Like, she plays with the whole concept of chosen ones. She has quite a bit of gender fluidity going on in here that you didn't see in epic fantasy around that time. And just a few different things. This is the first of a trilogy, and as the trilogy progresses, it does become more generic epic fantasy, but heavily influenced by the events of this first book. But if you're into that particular blend, like this first book is very much worth reading. So that was my third pick. For my fourth, I have yet another World Fantasy Award nominee. I think it's one at least. It might not be, actually. Anyway, it's Daryl Gregory's Pandemonium. And this is a modern day urban fantasy set more in like the 1950s, 1960s, that plays with the concept of what the world would look like if demons were real, if demonic possession was real. And we get for me, we get a very realistic look at it, in just the way that it just becomes an incorporated part of society in the way so many other horrors are incorporated. Like, we're very much a people who can allow homelessness, we could allow destitution and these kind of things to happen in front of us without batting an eye. We allow starvation and these kind of things to happen without. I just go along our daily lives. So in that way, demonic possession is very much incorporated into the story. Like, when it happens, people are just infuriated that their schedules are thrown off, that kind of thing. And that's just one twist on it that Daryl Gregory puts. Like, this novel is very much a homage to a few different things. Like, there's shoutouts to there's a slew of shoutouts to classic sci-fi, to comics and these kind of things. And using the idea of this whole demonic possession thing, Daryl Gregory kind of examines it from so many different angles, from the religious to the spiritual to the medical to the neurological to the psychological and he even goes like beyond humanity. Like at one point, there's a transhuman cult involved, and also it's a wild book. It's a really wild book, really fun. And all through it, we have a main character who is demon possessed or thinks he's demon possessed, who slowly begins to. We slowly see him degenerate as a result of this. So like it's just a well crafted story, extremely engaging, extremely fun. It was the third book I read by Darren Gregory, and the one that cemented him for me as a writer that I need to read everything this guy's written. So highly worth checking out. And then the final book was meant to be the first of a series, but the author decided to cancel the sequel due to the closeness of the content of that sequel with very real world scenario we had back in the 2020s. I don't need to tell you what it was, but yeah. Anyway, so this book is Alexis Henderson's The Year of the Witching, and this book is labeled YA, but completely ignore that. What we have here is the story of a young woman who's multiracial, who grows up in a Puritan society of all places. So you don't need to even begin to imagine the racism and the bigotry she faces before anything. Then we have the fact that she has a dark heritage that she begins to come into. Like this book is very much like, if you're into more witchy side of the more witchy side of things, this is definitely more your kind of style. And it's just this really engaging, haunting story. Like I was really captivated by it, and the horror in this is very much where it comes to the more eldritch side of things, and in the way that just the life that this young woman is forced to live in this society that she's essentially trapped in. Like there's multiple different elements there that play. But it's a really good book, and it's effectively a standalone at this point, as much as you might see it listed somewhere, in some places as the first of a series. And if you want an idea of what the witches are like in the story, think more along the lines of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina as compared to Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But yeah, that's those are 5 fusions of fantasy and horror that I enjoy tremendously, and I think are highly worth checking out. If you're curious about this particular blend of genres, this is a good place to start. And I also tried to pick books that you probably have never heard of before you clicked on this video. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me for today. If you've read any of these, drop a comment. I just love talking about these books. They're all books I would consider like favorites. And drop a comment or let me know what you think in general. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.